Greetings, y'all. This is the first part in a series of our great adventure to the great Midwest, traveling from Arizona to North Dakota for a family event where all the cousins and aunts and uncles will be in a few weeks. As some of you may know, it is much easier to find boondocking spots in the Southwest, where there are millions of acres of public land and communities that are used to people doing that kind of thing. Very different when you come down from the mountains and get into the Midwest. So we are using a version of the 3-3-3 rule or guideline to help us find those spots and be able to enjoy this meander across the country's middle section. There are lots of versions of this 3-3-3 rule, depending on the type of rig that you're in and what type of travel you like to do. We adopted our own version, and it seems to be working pretty well so far. And here's what we use. Of course, there are days when you drive less than 3 hours and more than 3 hours, but that 3-hour mark is pretty accurate in terms of fatigue from driving, and since we're nomads and we're boondocking, we don't need to make ourselves do anything. So let's find a spot within 3 hours-ish and enjoy it. It's very important to have backup plans, because using apps, the postings may or may not be accurate. Things may have changed since that posting was placed. Some spots are closed, and some are just like, oh, why would anybody want to camp here? So very important to have backup ideas. And you can do that using the apps that I'll be showing you. I've taken screen captures of where we've gone, how I found those spots, and what to look for. Since it's spring, summer right now, the 3 hours before dark is much easier to do and isn't really necessary, quote unquote, but it's still a good idea, because there are times that we've been looking around and haven't found our site until maybe 6 or 7, and that's kind of pushing it. It happens, but I'd rather it not be a regular practice. And of course, everybody's got their own comfort zone about all of these topics, and there are as many ways to nomad as there are people. So do what you're gonna do. Nomad your own nomad. In true nomad fashion, even on day one, we decided to change our plans based on the heat, the weather. It was going to be too hot to head south, so we headed east. Staying with some other nomad friends for about a week, and then had to use our first app. Just happened to be iOverlander. I have it on my Android phone and my Android tablet. You can choose the icons that show up depending on the filters that you choose. And I've got informal campsite and wild camping chosen because they stand for stealth parking in municipalities and dispersed camping or boondocking out in the wild. The other one that's important is where you might be able to find a shower. Based on what was available in the area, we chose Socorro, New Mexico, also because it was in that 3-hour time range. The reviews are fairly recent, and we decided to give it a try. Island Park is one in a series down by the Rio Grande River. We parked across from the picnic table and fire ring, and they looked like they hadn't been used for a while. And even though this was a dead-end turnaround like the review said, There was also a walking path, so there were several people going by us during the day. It's my understanding that these structures gather natural debris that mitigates erosion on the levees. Local flora on the park road. Cute little square in the middle of town. And a really great place to eat, Yo Mama's. Our experience was in line with the great reviews. Next, we needed a day in a big city to do all the things you do there. Laundry, fun Planet Fitness to take a shower, and stock up at Sprouts and Trader Joe's. After a long day in Albuquerque, we didn't want to drive very far, and using U.S. public lands, we found this great spot about half an hour outside the city. It was unusual in that we had to drive through residential area to get to this loop of public land. It was exactly as it appeared on the app and on Google Maps. We were the only ones there, staying overnight, and no one bothered us. It was a fairly busy trailhead with lots of people walking their dogs. And lots of evidence of being leased land to oil producers. Our next destination we also used iOverlander to find. I did some cross-checking with the public entity site that manages this area, just to make sure it was what iOverlander said it was. We could stay for 5 nights. Very clean pit toilets and trash receptacles as described. Someone did post that there was another area on the east side of the lake to camp in if this west area was crowded, but we weren't able to find it. Some intense weather rolled through, but no damage was done. Our next stop, we used a different app this time, Campendium. As boondockers, we used the feature to help us find sites that didn't cost anything, and we were able to find this really great place, Clyde Campground, up in the mountains near Colorado Springs. On the way from Maxwell Refuge to Clyde Campground, we stopped at Art Cartopia, a quirky little cool place where art and culture mix in really interesting ways. The approach to Clyde Campground is just short of an hour outside of Woodland Park, and there's lots of amenities there if you want to come into town. The scenery here was enough to keep us at our campsite. We were definitely in the Forest Service area, but there was private property at the end of our road and surrounding our spot. We were joined by a lot of people, but it was a holiday weekend, so it was to be expected. This creek was in our backyard and serenaded us to sleep every night. Day 15, we found a nice enough spot on iOverlander, but tried looking for BLM land in the area outside of Hugo. What we found was either very unclearly marked boundaries or obviously taken over by another entity. So we went back into town. As previous travelers had noted, it was a very noisy road and trucks going by all night long, as well as trains. But the next morning, during my walk to the post office, I enjoyed seeing all the art and the evidence of a community that was very invested and proud of itself. Getting deeper and deeper into the Midwest, we were discovering less public land and more inaccurate information about what might be public land. We ended up staying in this rest area after trying to find dispersed camping spots that just didn't exist. An unlikely source of information was Google Maps telling us that there was a campground, which was really public land. The only other reference we could find is this random listing on hikercentral.com, and we decided to give it a try based on that information. If I were making this trip on my own, I would definitely be doing more stealth parking in municipalities, but since my partner's more adventuresome in that regard, I'm doing a lot more boondocking now than I ever have before. This approach to the site was fairly steep, rutted, and was really interesting getting out of after a couple days of rain. We got acquainted with the tick population and Midwest humidity, but the area was beautiful, and we extended our run of nobody bothering us. We also happened to be on the edge of a bison management area. Heeding the signage and also common sense, we just enjoyed their presence. Chita Delhi in McCook, Nebraska provided us with one of our best eating experiences ever, really, which might have something to do with their homemade mustard and mayo. My sandwich was amazing, and so were those onion rings. We wanted to stay for this Buffalo Commons event, but it was a week out, so we had to pass that opportunity up. Another oldie but goodie planning app is freecampsites.net. Using the trip planning feature will give you a list of places to check out all along the route that you want to go. We found this great spot that allowed one overnight and served our needs just fine. There was toilets, trash, and a beautiful lake to watch everybody fishing. We survived another night of occasional highway noise and trains. In a previous video, I walked through the process of blasting the carbon buildup in my Kia's intake valves and wanted to provide a follow-up. For the first time in almost a year, my miles per gallon has jumped back up into the 30s range instead of being in the 20s, which I'm very happy with. Part 2 coming up, the more challenging Dakotas and finding boondocking spots on the way to the family event. Thanks for watching. See you down the road.